Good evening and welcome to The World Today. I'm speaking with Andrew Murray. Andrew is a political advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, working together with Seamus Milne, the Director of Communications, to keep the campaign on the road and discipline. It has to be said that Corbyn was excellent. The first political leader fighting a campaign, and we have a terrorist attack. 2, Manchester, and then London. And everyone assumed, by everyone I mean all the pundits assembled together, assumed that, okay, this was going to finish Corbyn off, but why should it finish him off? And that speech which he made, I thought was in some ways the most thoughtful and powerful speech of the campaign, explaining very cogently and carefully, without exaggeration, that what is happening here, we hate it, it's despicable, it has to be dealt with, but there are reasons and causes for it, which is our presence in the wars in those countries and what we have done to radicalize the situation, radicalize within inverted commas, which is leading to this. Of course, there was shock horror, but they dropped that argument very quickly because they must have done some private polling, the Tories, and said, this is going well, what Corbyn has said, not worth fighting.
Partly it's about treating the British public like adults.
Exactly.
And we had this terrible atrocity in Manchester where a suicide bomber blew himself up and killed 22 other people, many of them young women going to a concert. Campaigning had to be suspended for 2 or 3 days after that. And when resuming campaigning, I think Jeremy took a view it would be foolish to just pick up talking about pensions or the NHS or wherever you'd been. You had to address what had happened and address it in a mature and measured way that makes no concession to excusing or trying to explain away the crime, but looks at why this is still happening, why 16 years into a war on terror, atrocities like this are still occurring. And I don't think he or anyone is arguing it could be traced back to one simple cause, or there's now, if there ever was, there is any longer one simple thing that could be done that would stop this. But certainly drawing attention to the fact we've had a war on terror that has failed, that actually it has not just failed, it has made things worse in the sense of creating failed states throughout the region. Remember, in 2001, Al-Qaeda or groups like it really were entrenched only in Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Now they have mushroomed across the region. And so drawing attention to that and saying we have to stop a foreign policy that is not making things better, but is in some respects making it a lot worse. And this was a mature argument. It had been much easier just to say, this is awful, we must simply condemn it and purely rely on anti-terrorist measures or whatever. But of course, when he made the speech, the Conservatives responded in a knee-jerk way. You're blaming Britain, you're blaming us for this, which of course was not what he was saying at all. There could be no reading of his speech that actually sustained that interpretation. And then there was a public poll on the day which revealed that I think nearly 2/3, around 60% anyway, of people thought he was right and 21% thought he was wrong and the rest had no opinion. And then, of course, they dropped that line of attack completely. Because, I mean, the conventional wisdom is that these atrocities would work in favour of the government of the day, I suppose. But I don't think it made any difference one way or another in terms of people's views, which is as it should be. I mean, if people say we shouldn't let democracy be diverted by dreadful attacks like that one and the subsequent one in London, then it really, you'd hope that it wouldn't be shifting people's views a lot one way or another.
In any event, it's hardly a secret to British intelligence who these kids are who do this, Andrew. I mean, the Financial Times of all newspapers had a 2-page essay on this after Manchester, pointing out the Libyan links and pointing out that a whole number of Libyans in exile, where Manchester is a particularly large community, were trained and armed and sent to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya. Mm-hmm. And this is them coming back disappointed because the country's in a state of collapse. 3 different factions of jihadis controlling 3 parts of the country. and then some kid inspired by God knows who goes and does this. How can they not see a link? And in private, of course, I'm told that quite a few people within the Foreign Office and the intelligence agencies blame the politicians for this. They're saying it's easy to blame us or the police for not carrying out our duties. We do try and do our best, but the decisions which are causing this are taken by politicians. It was the same during Iraq. When you remember, 46 ex-British ambassadors wrote a public letter saying how appalling this was. So what is being said is quite mild and nothing new in that sense.
No, it isn't new. In fact, this issue of the Western powers, the USA and Britain, using jihadis to achieve foreign policy ends and then finding the whole thing spins out of control. This began in Afghanistan in the 1980s. One can see the same problem from Iraq and Syria and now Libya, that they indulge or support jihadis in bringing down regimes that the West don't like. So I think there is a serious examination of foreign policy required, and I think you're right, many people in the security services will probably agree with that. And if, as we move on from the general election, Jeremy's speech after Manchester helps stimulate that or push it along, that will be a good thing.
Andrew, what is your opinion about when we'll see another election? I mean, there's all sorts of speculation going on. Do you mean a year, 2 years?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, obviously the Conservative Party will want to push it back as long as possible.
Obviously.
They will not want to go to the polls. There's a parallel with 1974 when Harold Wilson won, but had a minority government in February, went again in October. However, Harold Wilson was sort of had a bit of the wind in his sails at that point.
He did.
And you probably thought that if he had another election, he would win it, which he did. Yeah. I don't think that's the situation now at all. We might be more like, if you want an analogy, later on in the 1970s, when you'll remember the Labour government, because it lost by-elections and so on, lost its parliamentary majority and became to rely on an arrangement with the Liberals identical to this one with the DUP.
Yeah.
A confidence and supply, it's called, where you get the support on the key votes. And that limped on for 2 or 3 years until Callaghan finally had to call an election. I don't see this arrangement lasting anything like as long. I think Theresa May is discredited, where Jim Callaghan wasn't in his own party anyway at the time. And the DUP, a sectarian, ultra-conservative party from Northern Ireland.
With links to terrorism.
And several of its elected MPs, now part of the new parliamentary majority, were endorsed by violent groups on the loyalist wing of Northern Ireland politics, which is ironic given the amount of attacks made on Jeremy Corbyn's historic meetings with Sinn Féin leaders in the 1980s. So I don't see this as being stable. The Conservative Party, as we discussed earlier, is riven, but I think they will want to change their leader before they have another election. Boris Johnson may come back in the frame. There'll be others certainly as well. So I would have thought, if you're asking me to guess, I would say sometime next year.
I mean, there are so many imponderables in there, actually, that it could be triggered off by anything which none of us can think of at the moment. Andrew, one thing we haven't got down to discussing, which is, of course, critical and important, is Brexit. The decision by the majority of the British people to leave the European Union as is. And now there were 2 campaigns for remaining in. One was the official campaign fought by David Cameron and his supporters and the Lib Dems very enthusiastically. And there was the second campaign, also for staying in, but fighting from within to alter some of the structures of the EU, and quite critical of it, waged by Corbyn and Labour. And Corbyn, to his enormous credit, in my opinion, refused to wage a joint campaign with the Tories, because he said we have too many differences on various things. Could you describe, because most people had no idea what the Labour campaign was like, because it was never shown on television or reported in the press. And there's a third campaign, a tiny campaign of leftists, socialists, communists, others, for Lexit, a left exit, which unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your views, didn't get off the ground. So these were the two main campaigns. And Corbyn was attacked very ferociously for not helping the official campaign, etc., etc. What was his thinking on Brexit?
Well, the Labour Party's position was for Britain to remain in the European Union. As you say, Jeremy Corbyn took a position of remain and reform. He was talking about the profound changes that the European Union needed to make, bearing in mind the European Union's role in the sort of torture of the Greek people over recent years, its role in austerity. He felt you couldn't just go out and say, stay in the European Union as is. We should also remember that Labour had damaged itself critically in Scotland. There's now a sign of it recovering, but very badly, because it fought a joint campaign with the Tory party in the Scottish referendum on Scottish independence. There was no way that Jeremy Corbyn was going to repeat that mistake. The result, of course, was a shock to many people in the Labour Party. I think that probably helped fuel the ill-advised attempt to remove Jeremy Corbyn by the PLP a year ago. But I think in the context of this general election, it was very important that Jeremy Corbyn made it clear that the choice was now not between Brexit or not Brexit, it was between a Labour Brexit and a Tory Brexit. That's so that the decision has been taken, that decision must be respected in the referendum, but we don't have to sign up to anything on everything that Theresa May was going to negotiate. And in particular, he emphasised the importance of trying to come to arrangements that, as far as possible, protect employment. He's also clear that the rights of EU citizens already living and working in Britain must be fully and should be unilaterally guaranteed. It's quite wrong to use them as bargaining chips in the way that the government appears to be doing. He emphasised continuing support for human rights in the European context. So we had a different and distinctive position, but it wasn't about trying to reverse the decision of the referendum, because in many areas, constituencies in the North, Labour areas, the majority, sometimes the great majority of people had voted, in spite of the Labour leadership's official position a year ago, for leave. So in a way, the brilliance of Jeremy's position was he managed to retain the support of those Labour voters, and they were the majority a year ago, who voted to remain in the European Union for one reason or another, and also prevented a hemorrhage of votes to the Tories, or possibly it could have been UKIP, hypothetically, that didn't happen at all, of people who felt that, who'd voted leave, perhaps to express a rebellion against the status quo, a rebellion against the elite, and who also found, of course, a lot that they liked very much in Labour's manifesto. So that was the course he had to navigate, and I think he did it very skillfully.
What are the central issues involved now in negotiating? What would be Labour's position on, say, for instance, immigration, which is a problem which I have to say, Andrew, the left has been, apart from having a very good moral position on this, which most of the left has always had, but morality isn't enough. There are concrete problems here. And one of the things Jeremy said was that he was in favor of free movement as long as these workers worked under trade union conditions, did not help to lower the wage rates of workers in this country, which I thought was an important start, actually, and it's things which have not been said before, but it's good that they were said. But let me put it to you like this. By and large, the left here and elsewhere in Europe is being for unlimited immigration, which on the face of it is a perfectly good position, and it's a position which is totally defensible, in my opinion, or largely defensible in a world in which the free movement of capital is not prohibited. So capital can move freely, but labor, also as a commodity, can't move freely. So in the old days, we used to argue that in a planned economy, one could restrict immigration because it would be part of an overall plan, but there's no planned economy at all. So how do you think this should be dealt with? Because there's no doubt it comes up in Italy, it comes up in France, in Germany, in Britain.
Well, certainly it's been a huge issue. I mean, Unite, my trade union, knows this from surveying our own members over a number of years. It's been a very high concern, and I don't think it can be reduced to racism or racist attitudes, although those attitudes do exist. I think partly the whole question got confused or at least muddied in the context of the European Union, because there one is talking about the free movement of labour within the European Union, which means people from Eastern Europe and so on can come and get jobs in Britain. Because remember, this is a fairly ambitious attempt to create a single labour market from countries with vastly different wage rates, more or less overnight. And the dislocations this has caused are not surprising in those grounds where you had, as I say, workers in Eastern Europe who had benefited generally from very good education systems under the former regimes there, but very much lower wages. So they could easily do themselves a favour by coming and working in the more prosperous parts of Europe. But that then gets confused as an issue with the refugee crisis and with immigration from outside the European Union, which has always been strictly controlled and remains strictly controlled. So that all these issues get confused and knotted together. And one of the things you referred to it, actually, I think the idea first came from Len McCluskey, who's General Secretary of Unite, to say if you tackle this with labour market regulation, so you only people are getting the rate for the job and the proper trade union conditions or proper negotiated collective bargaining, allied of course to other social measures like investment and housing, a lot of the heat would go out of this issue. I mean, one dramatic example, which was highlighted by Dennis Skinner, who's the MP for Bolsover, a very long-standing left-wing Labour MP. He talks about his former mine when he worked as a coal miner, Shirebrook, where it's part of the coal field where there used to be lots of workers from Poland from the Second World War onwards. And the idea it was all a sort of white English workforce was wrong, but there was never any frictions, any trouble at all, because everyone got the rate for the job negotiated by the union and had union protection. On the site of that former colliery, it's closed 25 years ago, is now a Sports Direct warehouse, which uses agency labour for the most part from people brought in by agencies from Eastern Europe. No trade union recognition for those agency workers. There's sleeping 5 or 6 to a room in houses because of the overcrowding of accommodation. Dreadful conditions which have been subject to a parliamentary inquiry. And that this is the deregulated labour market with no controls, with trade unionism excluded to the greatest extent that employers can get away with, and that this underpins some of the social tensions. So it's trying to address these issues in a way consistent with the values of Jeremy Corbyn and of the left traditionally in this complex situation where the free movement of labour definitely it's been taken advantage of by employers to drive down conditions.
I don't think anyone disputes that, but they defend it because they're part and parcel of neoliberal policies. You get the cheapest labour where you can, why not? I mean, as far as they're concerned, this is completely normal. So challenging that is regarded as yet another slap in their face. But Andrew, there is a more serious point, which is this, which progressive Remainers, progressive supporters of the EU fail to take into account, and there is a contradiction here. That the manifesto we were talking about, the Labour Party manifesto, quite a lot of it, I mean, some of the principal demands in it, would, according to the practice of the EU, not be permitted. So, ironically enough, even if many young Labour supporters don't fully recognize this, Brexit actually helped to prepare a manifesto which can be implemented regardless of what anyone else in any other part of the world thinks about this. Because the EU has, I mean, they punished Greece, as you were pointing out, tortured it, for a manifesto which was not dissimilar early on, the Tsipras manifesto for Syriza. They said, you cannot allow it. And at that time, I remember going to Greece several times, I said to them, the EU is going to destroy you. I said it to Tsipras at a platform. The EU is going to destroy you because they don't like what you're doing. It's not that they can't afford it. It's not the money. It's that if you're allowed to do it, it'll become open house for every other small and large country, which they didn't see. So I think people surely have to be told that this is a question of political sovereignty, the right of a political party to fight for its own manifesto and to push it through if it wins.
Well, that's exactly right. And I remember I wrote an article myself a few years ago before Syriza had come to power, where saying this view that you will both challenge austerity and stay in the EU is simply not possible, and it wasn't. I mean, it could be possible if you were possibly if you were France or Germany, but not if you were Greece, and that proved to be the case. There was a choice to be made that in the end was imposed on the Greek people. Now, of course, Britain is in a different position, and it is a fact that outside the European Union, a government of the sort that Jeremy Corbyn is proposing to lead if he gets elected at the next election will be able to do things that would otherwise have been unlawful under EU law, particularly in the area of aid for industry and protection for industry at particular times. This has come up in the steel industry very recently. John McDonnell, who is Jeremy Corbyn's sort of unofficial number two, the shadow chancellor, the finance chief of the Labour team, did make a speech that wasn't much remarked upon after the referendum, saying that, of course, there would be new possibilities as well as new dangers. I mean, much of British manufacturing industry is oriented towards the European market, so clearly there are dangers there of jobs that could be lost if investment decisions are made away from Britain by the big transnational corporations that control so much of the sector. So there are dangers there, and those are the ones the trade union movement was very alive to in the referendum campaign. But also, if with the greater exercise of political sovereignty, there will be things that can be done that otherwise would have been impossible. And I think that the more we move towards the point of Brexit, however that's negotiated and whatever's in it, I think that will increasingly become part of the argument, because anything at the back of anyone's mind, we couldn't do this because the EU wouldn't allow it, that's not there anymore. Of course, the pressures of global capitalism will remain, and they'll be mediated in other ways, but this is an important issue, which didn't really come out in the referendum campaign to any great extent, unfortunately.
Keeping on the subject of Brexit, it seems to have had an amazing impact, unpredictable really, in Scotland, where people forgot that a third of the SNP electorate, people who voted for the SNP, one-third also voted for Brexit. So the notion that the whole of Scotland was for Remain was wrong. And my own reading of the situation is that the SNP losing seats to the Conservatives, which is a real tragedy actually, because one had thought that that was finished. But in any event, is linked to two things. One is that quite a few people were angered by the way in which Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish leader, SNP leader, treated Brexit. You're going to use this now to leave, we'll become part of the EU. That was not popular, I don't think, and she couldn't see that. And the second thing, of course, was that people are not blind. You know, the Scottish have usually been in advance of people elsewhere in the country, politically speaking. They saw the way in which small countries are treated by the EU bureaucracy. not just Greece, which is a sort of appalling example, but Ireland, which voted against, forced to vote in another referendum, threatened, creation of fear, till the Irish voted the way the EU wanted. So people notice all these things. So to present the European Union as somehow the perfect solution for Scotland didn't make sense at all. And I think she suffered as a result, and of being too neoliberal, it has to be said, in terms, what was always an important question in Scotland was, okay, let's suppose we're independent. Well, what are you going to put in that Scottish space? And on that, I think she was also under fire. So it's not, it wouldn't be a total surprise if the result of this election continued, and so one will have to intervene in Scotland again quite forcefully, I would have thought.
Well, I think it was very interesting, the Scottish election results. At the last election, only 2 years ago, the Conservatives and the Labour Party only secured 1 seat each. Now, as you said, the Tories went back to 13, they gained 12, Labour gained 6 to a total of 7. However, some of the margins that the SNP secured over Labour in, for example, Glasgow, were tiny. And with a shift of about 500 votes, Labour could have won almost every seat in Glasgow, for example. And Glasgow was the stronghold of the yes vote in the referendum campaign on Scottish independence 3 years ago. So there is definitely something shifting there. I think partly it is for the reasons that you say. Independence from Westminster loses some of its impetus if it means subordination to Brussels. That doesn't sound like much of a trade-off. And also, because of devolution, which has been built upon, the Scottish government, headed by Nicola Sturgeon, does have some powers, even considerable powers. They haven't really used the powers they have. They've been talking about what they might do if they were independent, but not actually using the powers they have to address the social concerns. I think that Labour has clearly gained some ground in Scotland, because one of the reasons, I think not the only one by any means, for support for the SNP was a sense that the Tories are always going to win Westminster elections. Labour's out of the game, therefore we need to look after ourselves, protect our own position.
And an intense dislike of the Blair government.
Yeah, well, the Blair government didn't help. That's absolutely correct. But now Labour looks like not only is it back in the game, but it's back in the game with a programme far more radical than anything the SNP are doing or offering in Scotland. I think there is a sort of a rise of the class feeling, perhaps, and that can be built on. But of course, the Labour Party will have to be clear that it can offer something to those who voted yes, as well as those who voted no in the independence referendum.
So, Andrew, to conclude, a volatile situation.
Yeah, it is a volatile situation, but I think volatile in an encouraging way. I mean, I think, I don't want to overstate it, but I think that this election has restored an idea of socialism as a viable political option in almost mainstream politics, in a way that's 30 years we've missed it, really. We've had this crushing neoliberal consensus, which has affected really all governments from Thatcher onwards, and that has now been broken. Of course, it is falling apart in different ways across the world, but how encouraging it is that in Britain it is falling apart almost exclusively to the advantage of the Labour Party, a traditional political expression of the British working class, not to the advantage of a Trump or a Le Pen or any of these forces. Now,
or a Farage.
Or a Farage, indeed, who a couple of years ago had I think it's a very encouraging situation. I'm pleased we're able to see it, that a programme like that, and of course you can always think how things could be a bit better or a bit different and so on, led by someone like Jeremy Corbyn, with the reduced but still considerable strength of the British Labour movement behind it. I think it is volatile, but in encouraging ways. And I personally have been so enthused by seeing, well, not just my own children, but all the generation getting really fired up for social change in a way that's not been seen for a long time.
Andrew Murray, thanks very much.
Thank you.